So let me make sure everyone can see my screen. Okay, so welcome everyone to Energy Champions Ohio. Today is Decoding Your Bill, What Are You Paying For? And this is a 4-part webinar series. So there's 2 more, and at the end of this webinar, you have an opportunity to sign up for the next one. So, well, thanks a lot for attending today. A few housekeeping items. Please turn off your turn on your camera if possible, because we want this to be as interactive and as possible. And things are tough enough using Zoom, but if we can at least see our faces, it makes communication a lot better. So, but I know there's obviously there's reasons where you can't turn on your camera. In the chat box, please let people know where you're from in Ohio. Any guest that's disruptive will be muted just to make sure everyone has a good experience. And then, you can put any of your social media links in the chat at some point so that way you can connect with other attendees if you want. And then don't forget, you can always use the chat box just to promote anything you want or have conversations. Okay, so our goals tonight, teach participants how to decode and understand their electric bill and create opportunities for networking and connection through the breakout room discussions. And here's our agenda. Introductions, which we're doing now for about 5 minutes. Decoding your bill, what are you paying for? That's going to be a 30-minute presentation, and it's a good one. And then we'll be open for questions for about 10 minutes, and then after that we'll go into breakout rooms where you can discuss amongst yourself some of the top things that you learned, and then after that we'll also kind of get some feedback from what you discussed in your breakout rooms, and then we'll have some time where you could, if you want, you can sign up for the next event. So just quick introductions. I would say, if you can, just your name, what city you're dialing in from, and what you hope to gain from the session today. And that also helps our presenter, helps her kind of get a gauge for the types of questions you might have, and make sure that she covers them during the presentation. So, if you in the chat, your name, the city you're in Ohio, and what you hope to gain. Okay, so I see people are putting some information in the chat. Okay, so I will introduce our presenter, Karen Nordstrom, and she's going to discuss decoding your bill. What are you paying for? She's a clean energy attorney, and she's with Ohio Environmental Council. So, Karen, I'm handing things over to you.
Great. Thanks, David. And this is a humongous topic, and I have a number of slides to get through in 30 minutes. So hopefully we will have a robust discussion, but feel free to um, uh, throw ideas, comments, additional detail into the chat. And but I'm going to try and go through this relatively quickly to give a full overview. But this is certainly a detailed topic, and there's so much more that could always be said. I've been working in this area for 3 years, and there's still new things I learn all the time. But hopefully everyone learns something, and we have a good time. So what we're going to go through is sort of the 3 pillars that make up the grid system in the way that and the 3 pillars sort of the charges on your bill. This is what we talked about in session 1. And if you missed session 1 and want to go back and see it again, we'll include that link in the follow-up email. But the generation, transmission, and distribution, sort of the 3 pillars of the 3-legged stool that form sort of the conventional way that our grid operates. And that's what we talked about last time, just the sort of foundations of how our grid has conventionally operated. So it's kind of like look at a family road trip. Generation is the packing up and leaving, the actual creating of the energy. The transmission system is like the big highway with multiple lanes with a ton of people on the road. And then distribution it creates that off ramp and then has the roads and streets to take the lower levels of voltage into your home. And so here's just another representation of that sort of linear progression that the conventional grid works under, and how our bills are categorized. The charges on our bills, those are the three buckets. So your utility bill. This is AEP's bill. I see people are from all over the state, and so your bills will all look different. There's no real standardization requirements with utility bills for the investor-owned utilities. So yours may look different, but as you can see here on AEP's bills, there you can see the three major buckets: the transmission, distribution, and generation. So I'm going to start with the distribution service. This is those roads and streets, and they're owned by the utility that actually sends you the bill. So, you know, AEP Ohio, Duke Energy, AES, First Energy, and its three subsidiaries, or you know, a municipal utility or a co-op if you live in an area that has that. And so the distribution side is managed by the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. That's the state regulator. Distribution utilities can't change their rates without going through the PUCO. The PUCO is the one that decides, approves rates. And that happens in a variety of cases before the PUCO. Some of the major cases are rate cases, where they create those base charges, those sort of foundational volumetric charges. There used to be cases called electric security plans, where they created all of the riders that some people that show up on some people's bills. As you can see, they don't show up on AEP's bills, but they're just sort of extra charges on top of the base rate. This will be changing. New legislation got rid of riders and created a new multi-year rate plan, which is, we're yet to see exactly how that shakes out. So stay tuned for that. And then other things like audits, tariff adjustment cases, are also ways that your rates get changed. So how did utilities make their money? It's you know, been made into a very complicated, detailed system, but it boils down to, in many respects, that, you know, in rate cases, sort of the conventional way to set rates, the PUCO looks at all of the costs, all of the approved costs that they say, these are the costs that we're going to allow you to collect from ratepayers. They look at how much revenue the utility is taking in, and they add what they think is sort of a fair return for the utility. Because, and here we're talking about investor-owned utilities. I mentioned there are co-ops and municipal utilities that, again, they set rates looking at approved costs minus revenues and you know, some sort of profit for co-ops. But here we're simply talking about the investor-owned utilities, because that covers most people in the state. And so the investor-owned utilities get some sort of return that they then pass on to their investors, because at the end of the day, while the government has granted them a monopoly, they are in fact a corporation that in most cases they pay dividends to their investors. And so return on equity, that's the big piece that sets their sort of profit, if you will. And so you're paying the utility for the benefit of using their system, and like the cost to maintain the system. And then also on top of that, what should the utility receive to pay back their investors for sort of investing in and providing investor capital for the utility to use. And so it's a mix of the return on equity decision is not completely a science. It's an art and a science. And it is left up to the discretion of the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. And they should be balancing what they think is reasonable and fair for the ratepayer to pay for the benefit of using the utilities system and getting the quality of service that they get compared to what they think is fair for the investor to get back compared to the risk that the investor took on in investing in the utility. And so a big buzzword in the area of rate making and setting base rates is something called CapEx bias. So regulators categorize utility expenses. So that very first category that we look at, all of the expenses that the utility has, those are broken up into two main categories. Sort of the general operating expenses, the operation and maintenance. So labor, things like tree trimming, maintaining buildings, all of that kind of stuff, paying folks. That goes under this O&M, operations and maintenance category. And then the sort of physical infrastructure, the wires, the circuits, the poles, that's all the capital expenses. And that's referred to as CapEx. And in industry, they refer to it as CapEx bias because utilities their return on equity is set by a return on their capital assets. So they earn a return based on how many capital assets they have, and it creates an incentive to build new stuff instead of trying to get the most that you can out of the stuff that you already have. And so that's called CapEx bias. And a lot of rate design is at times intended to counteract that CapEx bias. But a lot of what the utility is doing is, coming and saying we need to build all this stuff to promote reliability. And the PUCO's job and advocates' jobs and us as the public is to scrutinize and say, do you really need all of those expenditures to accommodate customer needs and maintain reliability. So that's sort of the push and pull that we're always looking at. The utility needs to invest in its infrastructure. That we as customers pay for them to be able to invest, but we need to keep in mind that within the system, this is at the end of the day, they are investor owned. They have investors they're responding to, and there are sort of incentives baked in that aren't always in the best interest of the customer. And so on top of base rates, the other thing that makes up a lot of people's bills are riders. And I just pulled this off of the PUCO's website from January 2025, and you can see this long list of riders. And so riders have been used to collect money on investments more quickly. So a rate case only happens every so many years. And in the meantime, as the utility is spending money, they're not collecting on that money, on those costs, until they go in for a rate case and have all those costs looked at and approved. And so a rider is a way to go to the utility and say, we're going to make these expenditures. We'd like to recover them in real time so that we can make sort of forward-looking investments, and we don't have to wait to recover on those investments from our customers. Like I said before, HB 15 got rid of riders. And part of the reason was, as you can see, they are starting to eclipse the base rate, right? They're starting to take over the bill. And so each utility's riders will last as long as the PUCO has approved them as of the day that the bill went into effect. So they're not going away immediately, but they will be phased out. So riders will eventually be a thing of the past. And then the other thing that you'll see that's part of the distribution service charge is a fixed charge. So, this charge here, right above where the arrow is, that's a volumetric charge. It's based on the amount you use. And this customer charge that you see, that's fixed. That's the same every month. And the reason that there's this fixed charge is because utilities argue that many of their costs are fixed. It doesn't matter how many customers they have or how much their customers, how much uh, electricity their customers use. At the end of the day, it always costs the same amount, regardless of the actual usage from the customers. And so they argued to the PUCO, we should be able to have this fixed charge to recover these fixed costs from customers. And but the flip side of that is that fixed charges, they hit those with tight household budgets harder. And it removes the incentive for customers to conserve energy. And a study done maybe 5 or 10 years ago showed that fixed charges can lead to a 15% increase in consumption. So it's not just theory that it takes away folks' incentive to conserve energy. It actually has resulted in folks using more energy. And for folks with tight household budgets, they can take on unsafe or practices that end up costing the collective more because they want to avoid these high costs. And this chart that I have here is from the Energy Information Administration. It's a part of the U.S. government, and it looked at energy insecure households. So that means households that are a large portion of their monthly budget goes to their energy bills. And they found that they were actually paying more per square foot for energy. And I posit that this has a lot to do with fixed charges, right? Because, they're not able, folks with tight household budgets are less able as fixed charges increase to manage their budget and then end up paying more per square foot for their living space. But fixed charges are legal. They won at the Ohio Supreme Court. Mostly in the natural gas space, fixed charges have been going higher than they have in the electricity space. So it's been litigated more on the natural gas side. But in 2010, the PUCO broke from practice of keeping the fixed charge relatively low for natural gas and started increasing it, by 20%. And the Ohio Consumers Council challenged it, and the Supreme Court said it's okay. Those arguments that were made on the first slide that I showed you all about fixed charges, those won the day. And the Supreme Court said, it made sense. It was okay to have fixed charges as long as the utility was also putting in place ways to mitigate increases for the lowest income customers. And right now, there is actually a case pending before the Ohio Supreme Court for Columbia Gas. Their fixed charge will go up to $57 a month by 2027. So, if you live in Columbia Gas's territory, you'll pay $57 before you even use any gas. And so that's pretty high. And so some advocates at the Environmental Law and Policy Center and Citizens Utility Board of Ohio are challenging getting that high on fixed charges without the same kind of mitigating measures. And we'll see how far that goes. Fixed charges also affect payback for rooftop solar. And so when it comes to your distribution charges, you can advocate at the PUCO. You can comment in cases when they're before the PUCO. You can contact your county commissioners and local leaders, and you can reach out to your state legislature. So paying for transmission. These are the big highways. These are those big sort of I call them, they don't really look like Eiffel Towers, but they look like Eiffel Towers to me. They carry really high voltages across our region. And this is where, our bills have been skyrocketing. This is really where it's coming from. So the transmission, it's really, when it comes to setting transmission rates, it's really a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So individual companies, private companies own the transmission lines, and they have monopolies over certain areas. And they are regulated by a sort of pseudo nonprofit entity called PJM, which then in turn has to get approval for any major policy shifts that it does from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So a lot of cooks in the kitchen setting those rates. And so, the big thing that has caused this hike in our bills are what's called capacity markets that are run by PJM. And so what they do, the reason for capacity markets is to try and make sure that there's always going to be enough energy for us, and we're not going to have some major rolling blackout across a region because the transmission lines just can't keep up with demand. And so the way they do that is PJM forecasts what they think the demand will be on the grid, and they add a little, just in case room. And then energy producers and demand response programs, which are programs set up to help a group of people, a group of customers, curb their usage at high peak times, bid in and say, we can curb this much usage at high peak times, or we can provide this much energy at high peak times. PJM decides how reliable those bids are, and then sets a price based on demand versus supply to try and incentivize there to be enough supply. So if demand is really high and not a lot of supply bids in, or not enough as much supply bids in, then the capacity price is gonna go really high, and that's what's happened here. And part of that is that PJM decided after the 2024 winter storms, PJM realized that coal and natural gas aren't as dependable. Some natural gas froze, some coal plants shut down because it was too cold. And so PJM pulled back just how much of what they thought they could count on from those. And so now the stool is off balance. The regulators didn't plan for the demand skyrockets that we've seen. They were slow in allowing more energy to come online, particularly in allowing more renewable energy to come onto the transmission system. And as a result, we've seen our prices skyrocket. And this is just to show you a little bit more about how there are so many cooks in the kitchen. These are sort of all of the pieces of the decision-making matrix at PJM, and then which then goes to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So a pretty complicated web for how the price ends up on our bill. And so where can you advocate? You can advocate to your state leaders to put pressure on PJM, as well as your federal representatives, senators, and the executive. And so paying for generation, this is the part that you actually choose. This is not a monopoly. This is a competitive market for generation. And so, there is a default option that the utility provides to you, but you can also, shop on the marketplace. And the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio has an apples to apples website where you can look at, what's sort of the default option for your area, and compare it to some of the competitive suppliers. So is it worth it to go out and buy your own? It depends. More competition can mean savings. It can mean a push for more transparency, and you can try and find a 100% renewable energy option. There are some available from suppliers. However, there are also risks, like any market. There can be predatory actors. And the big thing you definitely want to avoid are variable rates. You want to find a rate that is set. So this is just a graph uh, from a study that OSU did comparing the average of the competitive suppliers to the default option. And in general, the competitive suppliers were higher than your utility's default option. But that again is an average of all the suppliers. So it doesn't necessarily mean that all of the suppliers are always going to be more expensive than the default option, but it's just an interesting graph to look at. And then also, your local government, your municipality or county, can harness all of the buying power of the customers in the area and go out and buy energy for you. So I live in the city of Columbus. They have an aggregation program that I'm defaulted into. Folks can always opt out and go and buy their own on the marketplace. But they go out and they purchase 100% renewable energy for City of Columbus residents, and because they pool our buying power, they're generally able to get it at a better price than just going out on the marketplace and trying to find it as an individual customer. And then you can also make some of your own. Rooftop solar, battery energy storage. In some places, if you live in a municipality, your municipality can create community solar. But if you have an investor-owned utility, it's not currently, community solar is not currently authorized, but hopefully our legislators at some point may take that up. And so you can send energy back into the grid and receive some compensation from that. That's called net metering. And so where can you advocate when it comes to generation? The Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, your city council. You can ask your city council to create a government aggregation program. You can ask a municipal utility, if you have one, to create community solar. And you can ask your state legislature for policies that support solar, community solar, and transmission reforms. And so you want to learn even more about where and how to advocate, come to our next sessions. We have coming up on Wednesday, October 1st, Smart Choices for Your Home, talking about energy efficiency, things that you can make as an individual. Utilities can create energy efficiency programs that, again, can sort of harness our collective ability for energy efficiency, but you can also, on your own, take individual steps. And then on Thursday, November 6th, we'll have a session on neighborhood power, working together for energy savings. So that'll be things like community solar. And I think I hit 7:30 exactly. So I'll turn it over to you, David.
Some Karen, really good stuff. Seems like it's really a web of paths you have to go through to figure these things out. So thanks for sharing that. Okay, so I'm going to open things up to everyone. If you have a question, just put your hands. You can use the Zoom put your hand up, or you can paste your question in the chat. And Bob, I see your hands up.
Hi, we have rooftop solar, and it's been pretty effective. We now have an EV car that uses a fair amount from the solar. I noticed that our generation with AEP Ohio recently went from 6.8 cents per kilowatt hour to 9 cents per kilowatt hour, which I thought was a huge increase. And I never saw any explanation. We're in the Columbus aggregation system, so I'm not sure how that went through without somebody saying something about that. Any comment?
Yeah, I encourage you to call your Columbus City Council members and raise your objections. I think that it is still competitive with the default for AEP Ohio. However, generation in general has been rising. with uh, many of the political forces have caused all types of generation to increase. However, that does also include solar. And there's been a lot of back and forth. Actually, the Ohio Environmental Council um, has testified recently about the aggregation program, and it's my understanding that the Columbus City Council is going to continue to look for opportunities to hear from residents and get feedback from residents about the aggregation program. So I encourage you to reach out to them and say you noticed this change. You'd like more communication about the program and more opportunity to provide input.
Thank you.
And I see Kat um, has hand up.
Yeah, I'm curious about the role of data centers. I know that we're on PJM's grid, and I know that the Dispatch ran an article about the Columbus area being a hotspot for data centers, and I'm just curious, like it's kind of two parts. I'm curious, like how real that is on like the driving up of costs of electric bills, because that's the titles I'm seeing all over in some of these news articles. And then um if so, is that like, would this be like data centers all over the PJM grid, or like is there more of a local impact of data centers on local bills? I'm just curious about how to break that down to like the Columbus context. If like the level of siting from data centers happening right now is what's currently affecting my bill, or will make it like, is it, I mean, I assume it's just going to get worse and worse. And so you just, yeah, thoughts on the data center question and all of this.
Yeah, that's a great question. Data centers and other industrial growth, but in data centers are a major energy user. They're actually driving costs in a couple of ways. So when we were talking about the PJM capacity markets and regulators not being prepared for a demand increase for those capacity markets, data centers are paying a huge or playing a huge role in that. They're driving up demand in a way that our regulators did not anticipate and were not ready for. And had PJM had like a really slow process for bringing new stuff online, and they had like these massive backups for bringing new energy projects onto the grid. And no one was really talking about reform that much. Renewable energy developers and advocates were, but other than that, people weren't really seeing the demand need spike the way it has from sort of just this massive um, bust of or boom, pardon me, of data centers. And so that has been a huge factor in sort of the overall PJM prices. But then the PJM prices are also broken up by usage, by region. So if you have a bunch of data centers in your particular region of PJM, raising up usage, that can also affect how much transmission charge is allocated to our particular area through AEP's parent company, if we're talking about Columbus in particular. And then the other thing is that the data centers actually locally, they need new infrastructure in a lot of cases to be able to even get into our distribution system. And so in a lot of cases, they need brand new substations and a lot more sort of hardware. Um, and uh, and so it can also affect your distribution charge if there are a lot of infrastructure investments needed by your distribution system as well. For AEP, they did create a specific tariff for data centers that we'll see how it's implemented, but if implemented correctly, is supposed to insulate users a little bit. from some of these high demands from data centers. However, it's something that regulators did not necessarily see coming. It kind of popped up pretty quickly, and at both the state and the federal level, regulators are trying to get a hold and a handle on how to manage the costs that are coming from the high data center demand. And then to your question about like just how real the demand is, data centers have had a practice of putting in more sort of inquiries for interconnection than they actually need. And I forget the entity, I apologize, but there was a study done recently by an entity that audits utilities regularly, just a consulting firm, and they found that there actually aren't enough chips to power the amount of demand that data centers are asking for from utilities. So, some of it is overblown. However, data centers are really high energy users. We are going to need, our grid is going to need to upgrade and adjust, and we will continue to see prices raised. There are reforms that regulators should be putting in place, and there's a lot more that regulators and lawmakers can do, this is definitely something that continues to be an ongoing problem and will affect rates.
Okay, Karen, thanks for that. Actually, C, Creamy, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, I got a couple. Y'all remember House Bill 6 that passed? Before it passed in Ohio, I could get a free energy audit. I could buy discounted light bulbs from Duke. I could also sign up for on-demand metering where if the power spiked, they would cut down my power at my house, and I got a credit for that. All of that went away during House Bill 6. Will it ever come back? And the second question is, Utah passed a bill where you can put plug-in solar panels on your roof. It doesn't need permitting. You don't have to go through all of the government permits. And you just put the panels in, you plug it in an outlet. It doesn't feed back to the grid. You just use it in your house. It doesn't go on a battery, but it does cut down on your energy. Or is Ohio planning on doing what Utah did?
Great questions. I did not plant those questions, but they are great questions. Yeah, so HB 6, to be able to sort of pencil out and make claims that HB 6 was going to save consumers money, the regulators got rid of mandatory energy efficiency programs, utility run energy efficiency programs that were on our bills. And of course, that was a boondoggle because, energy efficiency, saves money in the long run, whereas bailing out coal plants does not. However, it got rid of voluntary programs, it got rid of mandatory programs, but voluntary programs have always been allowed. But the PUCO has been very reticent to pick those up. The demand response program that you mentioned, where you could curb usage and get a credit for that at high peak times. AEP actually did just start up a program like that. However, that's been sort of the only one that's been successful of all the other. Duke asked for one and ended up rescinding that ask in order as part of its last electric security plan case. First Energy asked for one and the PUCO shot it down. However, just last week, the legislature introduced a bill to bring back demand response programs. And I'm trying to remember the name of the bill. but I'm sure we can send it out in the follow-up email. But actually, just last week, I believe in the House, the state legislature introduced a bill to bring back demand response programs, which, are critical. As I mentioned, demand response can be bid into the capacity market for PJM, that market that's made our transmission costs skyrocket. And actually, those resources were critical to the capacity market sort of being able to say we can meet all the demand that we're going to see. So it could be a really, really critical way of helping to immediately drive down costs, right? You don't have to build a new plant, bring on more megawatts to meet that capacity need. And so it's an important piece of legislation that the OEC Action Fund supports. And you can go to the OEC Action Fund's webpage, the Ohio Environmental Council Action Fund's webpage, to learn more about the bill. And I think we'll probably link to that webpage or to the bill in a follow-up. Thank you so much, Mariah. HB 427 proposes to establish voluntary demand response programs for residential and small commercial customers to help manage high electricity demand. And then to your other question about what Utah is doing with the plug-in solar, I've not heard anything about it, but it could be a really critical and important way of helping folks manage their electricity and their electricity needs. And so, I encourage you all to look into that more and bring it up with your lawmakers because it seems like a really promising option. Mariah, yeah, go ahead.
So just quickly, Myra, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're running out of time, so if you, I think we 1 more minute on this question, if possible, then we'll continue with the agenda, and if there's time at the end, we'll answer the questions.
Yep, I'll give them a really quick breakdown here. So the PUCO already heard from a product called Connect DER. That is a distributed energy resource. That is a brand that connects onto your electric meter. The problem with balcony or plug-in solar here in the States is that we are on a split phase electric system versus a 3-phase. So what we see in Europe able to be distributed that way isn't quite as safe here in the States, which is why so many of our regulators are cautious about plug-in solar. But we can dive more into that later. You're always welcome to email me. I'll drop my email in the chat.
Perfect. Well, thanks a lot. That's a very lively conversation. The chats actually has a lot of information that people are sharing. So I would also recommend you take a look in the chat if you have a chance. Okay, but let's go to the next item in our agenda, which is our networking segment. So the goals, the networking segment question is, what are the 2 things that you learned from the presentation? So everyone's going to be randomly put into groups of 3 in breakout rooms. The breakout room will last for 7 minutes. The objective is to get to know each other quickly, answer the segment question, and then kind of go into any discussion that you like. The format that we suggest is one is to mute yourself, because once you get into the breakout room, I think mute comes on automatically. Spend 30 seconds each introducing yourselves, and then 1 minute each on the segment question. And then after that, you can have an open discussion. And remember, you can leave the breakout room at any time for any reason. Tomorrow, are you going to create the breakout rooms? Okay, perfect. Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a really good discussion. I'm going to call on a few people and just to see what you discussed in your room and what you've learned, and maybe if you're it's stokes a few questions. But I saw Lana, you had your hand up so previously. So how did your room go? And maybe you can ask your question.
Okay, thanks. Hopefully you don't hear the beeping in the background. But I was in the room with Betsy. She's in the same city as I am. We're in the Cleveland, Ohio area. And Betsy is all solar and went with EV, so it was great to hear from her. My question was more related to, again, the breakdown of charges, the bypass charge and the distribution. I was wondering if, based on the city aggregation that we do, for renewable energy, I know location-wise, a lot of the renewable energy actually comes from Southern Ohio, and I was wondering if that is the reason why it like increased by 100% lately.
That's so yeah, Lana, I saw that in the chat as well, and I was trying to respond to it. So the transmission related component, that's what I was talking about, the transmission charge. And so that's the capacity market that's really done that. There's no difference in how the voltage is transferred across the state,
Mm,
whether it's renewable or fossil fuel. Once the
okay.
voltage is put into the transmission system, it's all the same voltage, and it's all the same cost to move it around the state. The real issue is what the regulator is that the regulators were not prepared for the increased demand,
Mm,
and so the capacity market, is sort of designed such to incentivize more generation, but it's gone totally out of balance. That three-legged stool has gone totally out of balance because there's just not enough generation. They're really slow to bring new generation online, and so not enough generation is there now that the demand has increased in a way that they didn't expect. And so in the capacity market is really where we've seen that crunch, because the one leg of the stool has gone this way, and so the capacity market has had to grow the price to try and incentivize more to come online, even though it's in a lot of ways actually the result of just some poor planning on the front end. But so it's really what it is this increased demand, with regulators being slow to incentivize more stuff or being slow to clear the new stuff in their queue and get it connected to the transmission system. And so that's really why the transmission has skyrocketed the way it has.
okay, thank you for clarifying.
David, you're on mute.
I just realized that. So yes, I think we have time for just for one more comment. Betsy, how did your room go?
I was in the same room as Lana.
Oh, so Michael,
David,
how did your room
I
go?
can I can respond to the comment really quickly. Drew
Oh,
made a
sure, go
comment
ahead.
really quickly that new solar on buildings can come online really quickly. And what I was talking about was utility scale solar, sort of those like really large solar with 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts to sort of meet that really high demand. That's what PJM interconnects to the transmission. But you can interconnect, yeah, like Drew said, transmit or pardon me, uh, you know, rooftop solar, which is a much less voltage, can be connected pretty quickly.
Okay, so let me share my screen, and let's talk about our next events. And Mariah, if you can put the link in the chat. Well, we have a couple more events coming up. So the next one is Smart Choices for Your Home. We have a hybrid event. There's an in-person component if you're able to come in person, and there's a virtual event where you can connect via Zoom. So this is the link for the in-person. And Maya's going to have the link in the chat so you can see if it's near your address and if it makes sense to show up in person. Or you can always use your phone to scan this and get to the link. And then this is another page. This is for the virtual event. So same thing, you can use your phone to scan the QR code and then register for it.
Thank you.
Okay, and that's it. So thanks everyone for attending our webinar. I really appreciate you coming. The discussions were really lively in person and also in the chat. A lot of information was shared there. and someone mentioned that they could not get the chat because they went to the breakout room and came back out. So Mara, I think you probably have access to the whole chat, so maybe they can ping you if they want to get the full chat. Okay, so bye everyone and have a good evening. Where's the in-person meeting, Mara, if that's in Columbus?
It's in Hilliard, so it's like west side of Columbus. So it'll be at the library, so it's a completely accessible facility. So everybody's welcome to attend, and we'll be broadcasting live. So if you can't make it in person, it'll be the exact same information on Zoom.